Raunilena?
I have a question for each of you. First, for Richard Boylan, would you tell us more about cloning, as you knew what Dr. Wolf has gone through? Because you mentioned that it takes today a year to clone a human being as an adult, I understood. I know that human cloning has been going on for decades, and today for $200,000 you can get a human clone in Canada. Another question for Richard. You mentioned that Dr. Wolf was predicting something for the year 2001 or before, but you didn't mention what that was. And for Derrel Sims, I'd like you to tell more about the human implantation programs done by the secret services in NATO countries especially, and the military. And for Stephen Greer, I congratulate you for your excellent presentation and also for your new book. So, starting with Richard.
All right, I'll try and do a little justice to your two questions. The first one had to do with cloning, specifically human cloning, cloning technology in the black world, the world of secret projects, as Dr. Wolf has stated openly in his book. I'm not telling you this on my own. I'm merely quoting available public sources. I'm saying that for my own and my family's protection because I've been threatened to stay out of covert technology issues. So I'm merely quoting available public sources, one of which is Dr. Wolf's fine book, The Catchers of Heaven, which I would recommend everyone to acquire. And see me afterwards, we can tell you how to do that. Cloning has been going on in the secret world of classified governmental research in the United States for decades. And the advances we hear about now, Dolly the sheep in Scotland, that all of that more simple animal and plant cloning has been going on for quite some time. Now, the military in the last decade or two has been doing human cloning and bringing it to a level of sophistication. After Dr. Wolf produced a prototype human clone that I described during my remarks, gestated from cellular tissue level to full grown adult in 1 year and brought to life, that particular experiment was terminated by his superiors because the individual had conscience, and that they didn't want a soldier with conscience. Dr. Wolf left the cloning effort at that point, but the technology was already available to the military, and he tells me they went on without him to do further development of cloning and have succeeded in producing human beings that do not have that kind of conscience or programmed to have other than a conscience in their behavior. And there is therefore the concern that these unprincipled human clones could be used for various manipulated purposes. The other question had to do with the information from Dr. Wolf from National Security Council that he saw signs in the national security community, the intelligence community in the US and elsewhere, that a public announcement, a public acknowledgement of UFO reality would take place. Well, he said it several months ago, so I'll back it out. Let's say before the year 2001 is over, that there would be public information that this is real. It would no longer be the whispered matters heard in UFO conferences, but would be in public domain discourse in the world generally.
Can everybody hear that all right? Is that okay? I'd just like to make a real quick comment about clones. If anybody can make a good one, my wife wants you to contact her right away to replace me. I'm just kidding. She says she has a clown but not a clone, so she's looking for help. I don't know anything about cloning or anything like that, so I'll leave that to these two gentlemen who may know a lot more about it than I. In addressing your question, this dear lady about implantation, alleged implantation of people by someone in the intelligence community or intelligence communities. There is good information that implantation, in fact, has occurred and has occurred for some time. Apparently, this was experimental in the beginning, and then, as often in covert operations, things get out of hand. The experiments get a little more bizarre, and then sometimes they quit telling the people they're experimenting on what's going on, and sometimes people just don't get told, and it just goes on anyway. This is an unfortunate aspect about volunteering for programs sometimes. Sometimes they don't even tell you, and it just happens anyway. I want to kind of hedge my bet here just a little bit by saying, and qualifying this, by saying the cases I want to talk to you about, I don't want to talk to you about 2 million cases or 100 cases or 500 cases of somebody else's work, because I can't prove that. There is much good information from Walter Boart and plenty of great people out there who literally do this for a living, and they are very good authorities in this sort of thing and have all kinds of wonderful data. What I can attest to is this. I've handled a number of cases of people who claim intelligence contact, even through implantation and so on. In the first 3 cases that I worked, I did not find this to be the case at all. It just wasn't. I was very disappointed because, first of all, you're making an accusation against the United States government, and I personally take offense to that if it's not true. Now, if it is true, I take another offense, because at this point, somebody in our government has done something, as far as I'm concerned, if that's happened, has done something that is inhumane, and it's just unconscionable. For anyone to do anything invasive to you without your permission, to violate your free will, to me is wrong, period. I don't care who does it. Dr. Helmut Lammer contacted me this last year and said, would you head up the medical and scientific work concerning the alleged implantation of people in this phenomenon, concerning this intelligence implants? And I said, I would be more than happy to look at these cases and go where I can with it. Since then, I've have 4 people that, and even before that, I had 1 case before that I wasn't sure what it was we found. But since then, I've retrieved 4 objects out of people. There is no question it is human technology. It is something that looks like a biochip that was implanted in these people. It is no question it is human orientation. What the thing does yet, we don't know. If it does anything, I don't know. But I think that to me is not the smoking gun. The smoking gun is not that you have found something in someone, but what does it do? There again, I suspect that, as I've mentioned before in other situations, I think that to be able to alter a person's neurotransmitters, so serotonin, dopamine, and things like this, you literally will own these people. You will control their emotions. You will do a lot of things to these people. There is technology out there where you don't have to be implanted. And there can still be a good degree of control over people anyway. This is coming technology. It's just the way it works. You don't have to have a quote-unquote chip inside you to get you to do something. That's an easier way of doing it. But there is synthetic telemetry and other techniques that are being experimenting on. My opinion is if we know about that right now, it's probably passé. That's my opinion. And so in the 4 cases I have right now, and I'll close with this because there are others here to speak. The thing that excited my scientist the other day, he says, this is incredible. He said, this guy has coughed up 3 of these chips out of his throat. He said, this is unbelievable. I said, what's so exciting? He said, because it looks just like the one that was surgically removed from the person in Brazil 4 years before. Now you have something 4 years apart, 2 countries apart, and people are totally unrelated. He said, that is quite exciting. And he said, Derrel, they are identical. And then he did tests for me that day, and he said, they're not only identical in their looks, they're identical in their makeup. He said, it didn't come from the same stock, he said, but it is the same manufacturer.
Well, I have so much to share on this subject that it would be another hour-and-a-half talk. And it isn't pretty. But to make it short and sweet, or maybe not so sweet, it is the truth. And I'll pull back the curtain behind which is the Wizard of Oz, pulling all the levers and handles to convince people of something that isn't there. And that is that you have a multiplicity of phenomena, plural, that the UFO community have mistakenly labeled as an abduction phenomenon, singular. What in reality is happening is that in counterintelligence and intelligence philosophy, if there's a phenomenon occurring that you don't want people to see, you create a phenomenon, a decoy phenomenon, which is even more prominent, and which all the researchers and the public and the media begin to follow. This is what the human abduction phenomenon currently is predominantly about, and about which very few people have reliable data or intelligence sources on. To wit, the ability to electronically have people experience whatever you want to have them experience has been around for decades. My military advisor, who is a man who sets up meetings between me and the Joint Staff and people of this nature, has personally been read into such a project, a device that was manufactured and studied first at the White Oaks Naval Facility in Maryland, which is now closed, and later manufactured by a number of electronic companies that are very highly involved in these sort of areas. And this is a device which he told me as follows. We can target an individual or a group of individuals, and they will have whatever experience we wish for them to have. If we want them to have a conversation with their personal God, they will have one, and they will believe it is real. That is how good these technologies are. The implant technologies have been around, in point of fact, since the 30s, and very sophisticated versions of them since the mid to late 50s, according to people I've spoken to who have been in corporations that have built these things. Remember, by the time you hear about it in the non-covert world, it's usually several generations old and passé in the subterranean covert world of unacknowledged projects. I personally take no offense at this idea being brought up in terms of being an American, because the government that I know and the government that I elect is not involved with these things, but it is a rogue secret government element within that government acting outside of constitutional and democratic authority, which are doing these things. So you can say whatever you will, I take no offense as an American. What I do say is that I'm offended that the community of the media, the UFO subculture, and others have been deceived according to these plans. And the plans are to put into the public domain hoaxed events using the following: alien reproduction vehicles that look like UFOs but are manufactured by a consortium of companies which include but are not limited to Lockheed Martin, Northrop Aerospace, E-Systems, EG&G, Science Applications International Corporation, and a few others. These devices have on them electronic systems like the ones I told you about developed at White Oaks Naval Facility. They are then using, on board these craft, bio-machine creatures. They look like a little gray from Zeta Reticuli. They are not. They are manufactured in a facility that I have people who have been in directly have been in. That is in New Mexico. These facilities are linked centrally to Los Alamos through an underground connector, which a member of my team has confirmed to me because he has personal knowledge of it. These are then used to simulate extraterrestrial experiences that are totally hoaxed and false, so that a certain spin on the subject will be put out there, a certain fear engendered, because the ultimate endpoint in that is the propaganda to get enough people frightened of all things alien so that a justification for the militarization of space and the spending of trillions of dollars in space-based weapon systems can be unfurled during this century, the century of the year 2000. Now that's a plan that has been underway for about 40 years. It is nothing new. And what I am concerned about is the extent to which the public has not been told about these things. Now, let no one misconstrue, because I'm going to hear this, I know, that I am saying that there are no people who have had ET contact or been taken on board spacecraft. There are. There are real extraterrestrial encounters. What I'm saying is that there is a dominant false phenomenon that has been foisted on the world, and in particular has been targeted into the UFO subculture, since it is at the entry point and the interface between the public and the covert programs, which are completely deceptive cases. And I believe that we have been not thorough enough in doing our homework with folks who can help us understand which experience is Memorex, which is false, which is real, and which is something that is part of an agenda from the intelligence community to, quite frankly, perpetrate a hoax on the public over a long period of time, the end result being the attempt to scare people and create fear so that the militarization of space eventually can be supported by the whole planet. Remember what Ronald Reagan said. He said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity be easier if we had a common alien threat to fight? Now, he said this on 5 or 6 occasions to the UN and to the Council on Foreign Relations. I assure you that this is part of the plan, and I think a very central part of the plan are the hoaxed UFO events that are made to look extraterrestrial, but in point of fact are totally military human programs run out of primarily the intelligence and industrial sector, where these high-tech little things are created and where the hoax is being perpetrated from.
I have a question for Richard Boylan because I didn't get a chance to ask him, so I'm going to ask him in public. I saw that Jill Firmage is investing a lot in education of children in science, and I heard that when you did step down or change your focus from looking at the conspiracy kind of theory in ufology, and you started looking into education. I heard something, I don't know any of the details, of looking at education of children in a star children school of some kind, or teaching children how to accept this reality. Could you enlighten us on that?
Yes, thank you, Paula. That's an area I didn't get to in my remarks earlier today, time constraints being what they were, but let me spend a moment to share with you perhaps some of the most interesting, exciting, and dynamic parts of this movement towards the new cosmic society that we are moving into. And that, of course, has to do with our children and our children's children. Extraterrestrials have been interacting with humans for many decades, and in an escalating way over the last several decades. One of the results of this interaction has been transformation in those individuals who've been visited, transformation in their consciousness. They realize ETs are real, there really are people out there. Transformation in their personal selves, their bodies, immune systems become more robust. They develop psychic gifts, sensitivities. Metabolism tends to slow down in a useful way so that the person lasts longer, doesn't age as rapidly, etc. But also, very often, what I would call minor tweaking of the reproductive material in that individual, so that later on, when in the course of their human life they have children, these children tend to be a little different than the average child. They tend to be brighter, more cosmic-minded, more psychic, more advanced in various ways. These, what I will call star children, are our future. Those who have been so touched, creating this latest evolution in our human evolvement, are going to be, it would seem naturally, some of the leadership in the coming society, because they will have the intelligence, the psychic sensitivity, the cosmic awareness, to be in the forefront as the extraterrestrial presence and contact comes out in the open. Now, it is very important, obviously, that these children reach their full potential. And in many constrictive countries, and America is one of the most constrictive with the cover-up still in place, it is tough for a child to be all that they can be in a culture that says UFOs don't exist, ET visitation of humans is doubtful or poppycock nonsense. How can such a child come out of the closet, so to speak, an American phrase we have, and acknowledge themselves as a child of a parent who's been visited, themselves visited and altered, and having abilities that are not considered normal? If they were to come out publicly in such a way in school, children would point at them, perhaps laugh, perhaps feel they have cooties, something you have to stay away from. And so these children are inhibited. And it has come to me and some other folks that work in this area that it is time to institutionalize how we're going to help the children grow into this coming cosmic generation. And one of the ways we do that institutionally is proper schooling. And so we are going to set up a Star Kids school, the beginning of a number of Star Kids school. We hope to have it underway before this year is out. We are having a conference in March in Arizona, a weekend workshop with some of these Star Kids and their parents to begin to put together the ideas and to begin to put together some of the faculty, so to speak, for working with these children. And this will not be a top-down teaching school where the master comes in and tells the pupil all the facts. These children already have embedded within them great pools of consciousness and ability. And the task will be much more to facilitate this, to sort of create an environment for these children to interact with each other and feel free to do things like teleportation or healing or reading the future, telepathy, of course, and to grow these abilities so that these children will, as they come into adulthood, be fully confident and capable of being their true, fully expanded selves that serves as models to the rest of us of what the new cosmic citizen looks and operates like. So it is indeed a very exciting time and project.
Two questions to Dr. Boylan about what you recently talked about. The kids, how do you choose them? How do you know they're star children?
I don't choose them. They know who they are, and word of mouth, as they become aware of this school, they or their parents or both begin to come forward and present themselves. We already have a handful with no publicity at all. Actually, the information is being done to a degree by the ETs, the extraterrestrials, who somehow make these kids aware that they should contact me or one of the other focal persons and present themselves. And so we have a core, and as we set up the school and actually get it operational, obviously at that point the publicity will come. We've already had one wire service pick up this story and run with it. I've had a few interviews, but it's not time yet to do a big ta-da announcement because the school's not yet operational. But as it becomes operational, yet more kids and more parents who are sitting there now scratching their heads, perplexed, what do I do with this child? He does things that are impossible according to contemporary science. Reading my mind, I begin to think of a question I'm going to ask him, and he answers me out loud before I've asked him the question. We probably need a school for perplexed parents right alongside the school for the kids. Indeed, in the workshop, we'll have a workshop for perplexed parents alongside. But word will spread both by normal human communication and apparently by the ETs telling kids that this is a point of focus. And not to over-focus it on myself and my group either. have a associate up in Northern California that plans on a Star Kid High School for the upper division, if you will. And others are beginning to surface. I've met one or two who feel that they would like to study this process and perhaps start one of their own. They know who they are. They've been touched by the ETs.
Thank you. I would like to go back to what you talked about before. Your contact, Dr. Wolf, he worked with the ETs day and night, and he was shown the technology. But this technology is also used against the ETs to shoot them down and so on. How does that work out?
Well, I don't know if he worked nights. I think at underground labs they don't pay attention to whether it's day or night on the surface. I think it's been shown underground the human being turns into a different time clock. So after a while it rotates around. But anyway, certainly, yeah, shoulder to shoulder with ET consultant scientists day after day. And much has been shared and discovered. And has some of this technology been turned around and used in a hostile way against the ETs? Yes, not by Dr. Wolf's initiative. In fact, he sits a very aging, sad, anguished man today because he has seen so much of the work that he and his ET colleagues collaboratively brought forward in the way of technological and medical and scientific advances being distorted and twisted to militaristic weapons purposes. And so some of the technology we know as particle beam, plasmoid, and other high energy physics is being used in weapon systems that are used successfully to shoot down some UFOs that come into 3D space and are therefore vulnerable. Electromagnetic pulse weapons, all of these. This is the conundrum of human society. If we were to step out for a moment as ETs looking down on Earth, we would say, gee, there are so many good people here, many of whom in this room. People of high consciousness who want to see the future, who want to grow the future. And on the other hand, there are so many of these distressful people. Their hearts are full of anger and fear, their hands are full of guns and super weapons. What are we to make of such a society? Do we extinguish it to get rid of the risk? Do we tolerate the evil in order to let the good people grow? You can see the struggle, and it is a struggle mirrored in us as we struggle with those same tendencies in our own societies. We have to take back our society from the distorted power centers and militarists who would save us from ourselves, so they say, and end up creating a militaristic state in the process of doing that. We need to get back to a cooperative, trust-built, free, open, communicative society as a planet, and take it from there so that there is no more hostile reception for those who would visit us and share what they know with us.
I have a question for Stephen Greer. You were talking about needing money, you needed funding. And what we saw here a little while ago on the TV screen, Joe Firmage, he seemed to have an awful lot of money. What's stopping you from connecting up with him?
Well, you'll have to ask Mr. Firmage. I have done. We've had very long meetings several times. He has his own plans and project, and I think I would defer that question to Mr. Firmage.
This is a question to Dr. Greer. You've been revealing a lot of information during this meeting today, and it seems to me like it will be compromising, or you can say it's a very dangerous job you're doing. Have you ever been tried to be stopped by someone, whoever that is, and what kind of methods do they use in terms of trying to stop your information, and how do you protect yourself?
Well, I put myself totally in God's hands. All the time. That's one thing. On a more practical level, although that's very practical actually, if you understand the spirit and how it works. There are a number of people you have to understand, if you read between the lines of what I shared today, who are very supportive of what we're trying to do. Very powerful people. Not all of them public figures, most of them not. And I think a sudden and unfortunate event in my life would be very much known and would very much be retributed severely. That's one thing. And the other is that we have a lot of folks who do provide protection for us on a lot of levels, in and out of government, in and out of corporate structures. And then there are a lot of things that you have to do for yourself. One of the things that a lot of people are not aware of, it falls into the category of misuse of wonderful technologies, is that just as you can energetically and electrically and electronically effect healing with energies, you can also induce disease states. And there's a very strange rash of cancer and other diseases amongst some people over the years, which seem to be quite inexplicable. My right-hand assistant, Sherry Adamak, and I, and a congressman we were working with, all got metastatic cancer at the same time. She is dead. I was supposed to die first because mine was a much more aggressive and much more universally fatal cancer. But I'm still alive for some reason. And we have done specific things to countermeasure this. Now, you can't prove that this is something that is of a sinister origin, but it's very suspicious, extremely suspicious. And it's not just a recent phenomenon. It's happened over a number of years when people have moved the ball closer to the goal line of disclosure on this subject. You find they suddenly develop horrible diseases and drop dead very quickly. Sherry Adamak only lived 7 months from the time of her diagnosis to the time of her death in January of 1998. Now, you have to ask, how is this done? I know how it's done. We're not going to get into it, but it's very easily done. But you also have to question, how do you then do countermeasures for that? There are things you can do. But what I mainly have done, to be honest with you, is to take reasonable precautions, to take care of myself, and I have a wonderful wife and 4 children who take care of me, because I'm sort of absent-minded professor sometimes. And you have a loving family, and you have many support people who help you, and many people who pray for your health and healing, and this is very useful. And the other thing is that I tend not to focus on these things. You know, I was warned to back off of this in '92. And I was taken to a place by the head of Army Intelligence, whose facility is at Fort Huachuca, and a very key facility to these programs, by the way, underground also there. And he and a whole group of intelligence people said, just how far do you intend to take this? And I was subtly and not so subtly told to back off. I said, I won't do it. And I told him 3 things. Number 1, when I was 17, I was very ill, and I died. And I had a near-death experience. And so I learned that there is no death, and therefore I do not fear death. Number 2, that I'm not rich, but I'm wealthy enough as a doctor that I can do as I damn well please, and I don't need your money. And number 3, and this is the most important one, is that I've had contact with the real extraterrestrial phenomenon. I know what it is, and you can't deceive me. He then offered to make me a part of this secret group, this MJ-12 group. He went subsequently to my wife and flattered her and offered the world in terms of power and what have you. I refused. Now, of course, ever since then, I have been defamed and attacked and what have you. You can't get on the internet and type my name in without finding endless defamations and attacks. But this is what you expect if you're making a difference. If you're not making a difference, you're not going to get attacks. So it's okay. You expect that. So my view on it is that not to put fear into it. I have no fear of this. Not at all. And whatever happens to me happens. So what? I've taken care of children in the ER, high school kids, 15 years old, who have been stabbed through the left ventricle of the heart and died in my hands because somebody patted their girlfriend on the behind. This is in America, of course. But so, what is, if there is some risk here, I say, so what? When the friend of the president told me after we had briefed his CIA director, came to my house and said, we're afraid that we think that the Kennedy will end up like, that the President Clinton will end up like Jack Kennedy if he does what you're recommending on this disclosure and on this inquiry into the subject. What I didn't say in my talk, I'll say now. I said, so what? He sends our boys off to wars and they die. I said, there's some things worth taking some reasonable risk for. What could be a greater thing than the return to the people of not only our government and our secret technologies, but the allowing of these technologies to come out to benefit the world, to save the world's environment, to lift up the people who are in poverty and in starvation, to be able to create a civilization that does not have to terminate in sort of a poof of oil smoke some few decades from now. What could be a greater thing? So whatever happens, it's okay. I'm very much at peace with it.
I got a question for Stephen M. Greer. The late Philip J. Corso, who wrote the book The Day After Roswell, he describes that since the crash in Roswell, the American military has been at war with the ETs. And he also mentioned that in the 60s, 70s, they had the arsenal, the weapons, to shoot down these crafts. And he also mentioned episodes in West Germany in 1974 where they shoot down one of these crafts. Also the video footage from the space shuttles, I think it's the STS-96, shows that some beams are shot up from the Earth directed to one of the UFOs. So my question is, are NATO and the American military at war with the extraterrestrials, secretly?
Yes and no. Let me be very clear in my answer. Very careful in this answer. I assure you that I am the only person that you will ever speak to who has had prolonged and multiple meetings with members of the Joint Staff, the head of intelligence, J2, for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA director, and other people like this. Many. These men, without exception, are horrified by what you just described. They have no access to the projects that are doing what you just described. The reason they have asked me to come into the Pentagon and into some of these places is to let them know what a rogue element that is within our society is doing. So when you ask, is the United States military or NATO involved in such actions, the answer is no in terms of the normal command, chain of command structure. The National Military Command Center is not running this project. However, there are projects that are using advanced weapon systems to track, target, and on occasion successfully destroy extraterrestrial vehicles as they approach Earth or enter our atmosphere. An Air Force Office of Special Investigations top secret witness, one of these 200 top secret people I'm working with, has described to me entire satellite systems which are not pointing down to Iraq or Soviet Union. They're pointing out into space, and they are used to pick up and track these objects and destroy them when they can. This has happened so often that the extraterrestrials have destroyed or neutralized a lot of these systems to protect themselves. So is this something that's a serious problem? Yes. I didn't speak of it because I didn't have time. The Boutros-Ghali family, the Boutros-Ghali was Secretary General of the UN, and they were very worried about this because they had indications that there was something very wrong going on that they knew nothing about. And so I gave a lecture at the United Nations that was entitled The Foundations of Universal Peace. And in it, I described what we had to do as a civilization to ensure that the future is one of peace and not of this kind of conflict. But this is what happens when what Eisenhower, the President of the United States, said when the military-industrial sector takes on so much secrecy and so much power that it escapes the controls necessary. I recently briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, in the United States. And this person had tried to make inquiries into the kind of projects that we've been discussing here today. This is a 3-star general. He was repeatedly told no such projects exist. The only thing he ever got out of his inquiry was a little E.T. doll about this big that someone gave him as a joke that was on his shelf when I went into his office at the Pentagon. When I discussed this with him, he was horrified that this could be true, but he allowed this. He says, "What you're describing, if true, is a horrible conspiracy, but I think it must exist, because when I took this office over, I was able to peek into a few places, and there were some very strange bedfellows doing some rather nasty things." And what he allowed also was that through all of his inquiries at the Defense Intelligence Agency, he was never told what was really going on. Now, this means then that you cannot say that the U.S. military per se, or the NATO military per se, is involved in such undertakings, but that there is in fact a renegade group, a secret government within the government, in fact, that runs these kinds of projects. It is very dangerous. I can't overemphasize. I have been playing this down this weekend because we didn't turn in. I tried to keep my talk positive, but I can tell you that there's a cosmic tripwire out there, and we're about to stumble across it, because an option of engaging in interplanetary war is not an allowable option, and our capacity to do so can be neutralized if we get to the point where that becomes an operational program in a large-scale way. So we're flirting with the disaster here, and the only way it's going to be made right is for the people and the people's representatives to take back control. When I was meeting with the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an admiral, Navy admiral, he told me, and Ed Mitchell, astronaut Ed Mitchell, was with me during this meeting. By the way, I introduced him to all this stuff on purpose, and that's another long story. But the admiral said, "I am horrified that this is true, because I am the person in charge of gathering intelligence for the entire joint staff and analyzing it, and you're telling me that these operations are going forward and I have no access." I said, "Yes, sir." Subsequently, he made an inquiry, and we gave him the entry point, let me say that, so his inquiry would hit the right place. He was told, "Yes, there is such a project, and you do not have a need to know. This is the admiral in charge of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I am telling you the truth. This is a very dangerous situation." And believe me, nobody more than I know, people think, I've asked me, "Oh, don't these people laugh at you?" Stephen Greer, head of CSETI, UFO doctor. I said, "No, there's been no laughter. I've seen grown men cry."
I'd like to address each of the panelists, perhaps starting with Richard Boylan. If each of you could say something from your current perspectives about two topics. One, having to do with sources of funding for research. How does one go about, are there any sources of funding that don't compromise the independence of the research being done? So funding, and number two, what your current observations that you may care to make about media and the possibilities for information being shared more openly. Thank you. If each of you could address those two items. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. I'd like to hear what everybody has to say to those questions. For funding, there seems to be a rule in ufology and the study of the UFO subject that the better funded a project, the more likely it is to be disinformation or run by the rogue group that wants to keep the subject muddled or trivialized or ridiculed. When you see billionaires dispense huge amounts of money for phony scientific organizations. I'm not talking about Joe Fromage, by the way. I'm talking about a individual headquartered variously in Nevada and New Mexico who has created an organization with the lofty title of National Institute for Discovery Science. That is a cover-up for the true information. This is highly distressing. The real, sincere, interested in the truth UFO research investigations have always been operated hand to mouth, out of pocket by individuals using their own life savings and some high risk of personal wealth and safety. This is not a coincidence. This is not perversion. It is by design. Anytime a serious stream of no strings attached money should ever happen to come towards a serious researcher, that source of funding would be stopped by the group that wants to maintain a monopoly on extraterrestrial technology. So all we see are little small hand-to-mouth operations by individuals or small groups of individuals on their spare time as a volunteer effort. That's all that is permitted to exist. It would be wonderful if that were to change, but that will require the economic power dominance in this world to change, where a small group have most of the economic control in this world. In the United States, it is said that 1,000 families own 40% of the wealth. And there are similar concentrations in Europe and elsewhere. As long as the more conservative members of these plutocracies decide that the broad world having extraterrestrial technologies against their personal money and power interests, the concentration of money and power that they enjoy, they will block it by all the money and power they have to block it. And so we are seeing a natural consequence of these things. I'm not saying anything that anybody who has taken the slightest study of civics doesn't already know. We would be surprised if it were different. But what we have to do as citizens is overcome the power of money and the influence it brings by a broad citizen effort around the world. And we have but one major weapon at our disposal, and that is the internet. Because it allows us, as some of the people in this room know so well, to communicate with each other in 15 minutes or less around the world at essentially no cost, and allows us to share ideas. And because it is built in such a distributed way, it was built to be able to survive nuclear war and still keep ticking. And because it has been built in such a distributed way that if you knock out one, there are a handful of other routes the information can go, we are able to communicate with each other. And so as we build a grassroots up citizen wave of consciousness, that I believe is how we are going to take back our society and the correct understanding of things from those who would control the official media and keep a blanket around this information.
Here we go. Okay, Rich, that's it. First of all, if I can get that right, our organization was funded by the National Institutes for Discovery Science for one project. A number of other groups were turned down. We had to face 18 scientists. They scrutinized us to no end. A number of them were medical doctors, surgeons. Some of these people had 2 and 3 degrees. Some of them had 2 PhDs and an MD. It was a most interesting experience. We were not in any way inhibited by what we were told about how we should proceed. So for me, in my one experience with National Institutes for Discovery Science, I wanted to sit Bob Bigelow down and asked him some questions. I said, I've got some questions for you from the UFO community. I said, you made a great deal of money available to the Fund for UFO Research. You made the money available for MUFON and for CUFOS. I want to know why you withdrew it. He said, I'll give you the answer to that instantly. He said, I made that money available for years, and he said the only condition on the amount of, and he said there was no amount on the money. He said the whole problem was this. He said, I told those people all they had to do was agree on one project. If they'll just agree, he said the funding, there was no bottom. He said, I could not get those people to agree on any project for 3 years. And that is the sad state of affairs of ufology. That was their fault. That was not Bob Bigelow. Bob Bigelow may be something else, I don't know. But I know for one thing, he said, I was just simply disgusted that they didn't spend the money. They could not even agree. And anybody that's been in the UFO community knows this is true. They just will not agree on what they want to do. So, in terms of funding, as Dr. Boylan has mentioned, much of the funding is that you do, your own research. Many of you grassroots investigators know for a fact that money is spent out of your own pocket. For me and my organization, the stuff that we do for people, the surgeries, the psychological work, anything that we do is free. It's totally free. We have absolutely charged nothing to anyone. We have no interest. It's not a money-making deal. It's a philanthropic effort. Our position is different than these two gentlemen here. It is to find the evidence of the events. It is to support the evidence with scientific and medical findings. We cannot, from our position, make statements that cannot be substantiated. I mean, unless we can substantiate that well, then we're not going to simply make the statements. It doesn't mean it isn't true. It doesn't mean that certain things aren't so. It's just that we're not going to make a lot of statements that we cannot personally support. So financially, it's been real difficult. It always has been, probably always will be. There are other people who are interested in doing things with us. The only problem I have with all that, and I tell everybody that has an interest in being a benefactor, this one thing. You cannot in any way control what I do, or what I say, or how this team works. If you do, nobody's interested in your money. It's just that simple. So one last thing I'd like to say. I spent 2 years in the Central Intelligence Agency. I keep most of the stuff quiet because it's not real pleasant. I knew assassins in the company. I assure you there is no one out there that's safe. If they wanted you, I promise you, you are not safe. Anyone can be hit anytime in any amount of ways you can imagine. I promise you, if you, as I do, and as the doctor here has mentioned, if you have a belief in God, you're better off with that than you are trying to trust some intelligence community for protection, because if they wanted you, they'd get you. And the only thing that would protect you would be the Almighty Himself, because they can do it. That's just a fact of life, and I can attest to that. These people are good. So as far as being safe, I think if anybody is alive or going to get hit or something like that, it'd be, first of all, a major mistake in most respects, because it points the finger back at somebody. And these people don't like fingers pointed at them. They like to do their stuff in the most covert way so it can't be pointed at them. So, like I said, that's from personal experience. So I could say a lot more about that, but I won't. But it's not something I read or somebody I talked to. I was there. And that's the reason I got out.
Well, I'd like to echo I'd like to put this in a little different framework. Echoing somewhat what Dr. Boylan said, and that is that in reality, the projects that get funded are the projects whose basic focus and premise is consonant with the overall strategy of folks running these secret programs. Is that clear? In other words, I met with a multi-billionaire in Europe. He's a major benefactor of also a lot of alleged alien abduction and alien implant projects. And in a private meeting which lasted 2 hours, he tried to convince me that, number one, all the setbacks in human history since Adam and Eve were the work of these extraterrestrials, which were the agents of Satan. Number two, that his funding of abduction research was because he wanted people to know the horrible truth about the aliens so that we could eventually unite to fight them in the last great holy war, which he referred to as Armageddon. He further tried to convince me that my talents and resources should go into those sorts of efforts, and when I begged to differ with him, we agreed to disagree. Later that night, at St. Moritz Hotel on Central Park South, with my 8-year-old daughter in another bed on the other side of the room, I was targeted with an some kind of electromagnetic system, which resulted in the following: total psychomotor paralysis, no ability to move my body, a projection of extraordinary fear into the room, and the beginnings of altered state of consciousness. I went, happened a couple of times over a couple of hours. I was able to terminate it simply by some meditative techniques I know and being able to transcend out of the normal state of awareness that we find ourselves in, identified with our individuality. And I was what they didn't know, of course, is that I knew the folks running those sorts of programs. They're very human. They're made to look extraterrestrial. And when I had turned aside this offer to work with someone whose primary purpose in funding abductionism was to get out his certain worldview on the cosmology and the extraterrestrial conflict, this is what occurred to me. Now, he made it very clear that the people he funded didn't necessarily share his view, but he was very careful in what he was selecting in terms of where his money would go, because that would amplify the part of the phenomenon which he wanted to have amplified for his own religious as well as strategic interests. I hope that makes that fairly clear.
Unfortunately, I have to terminate the day today by interrupting.
Oh no! We're all gonna get it.
By interrupting, and this makes me also to say frankly and honestly thank you, because, as you perhaps don't know, these wonderful gentlemen has come all over the world, from United States, all of them, here to be with us, spending 3, 4, 5 days on their way without taking a fee for this present.